Today on Ancient DOS Games, we're taking a look at Gods, a game widely loved by lots of retro game enthusiasts, most notably on the Amiga, where the original version of it came from before being ported to DOS. Now, I never actually played this before, and I went into this expecting a rich platforming experience, given the memories described from other players. Well, my first warning sign that stuff might go wrong was when I loaded up the digitized manual for my copy of the game to discover it was only 2 shoddily scanned pages, complete with a typo. Then I tried playing it, and after 5 hours of gameplay, I simply could not clear the first world, getting near the end of it time and time again and failing for some random unexpected reason every time. But it's not like I can't play hard games. I went online and looked up a playthrough of the Amiga version just to see what I was doing wrong or if the game was wrong, and much to my dismay, the answer was both. The first is that, much like Milon's Secret Castle on the NES, this is a game all about secrets. If you're not finding all the secrets, you're gonna have a bad time. And as you're gonna see in the footage that I captured, yeah, I found some secrets, but they represent maybe a quarter of all of the secrets in every level. As such, I was constantly hurting, underpowered, and stuck with fewer lives than someone who knows where to find everything. In fact, one of my major complaints of the game is that anything less than 100% precognition of what's ahead is liable to get you killed. However, the main issue is the control. The DOS version simply does not control anywhere near as well as the Amiga version. I don't even have to actually touch the Amiga version to know that. Just watching someone else play it felt more in control than what I was dealing with here. And for a game where split-second reactions can mean the difference between life and death, you cannot have anything less than perfect controls. Gods was originally developed by the Bitmap Brothers for Amiga systems back in 1991 and was later ported to a variety of systems, with the DOS port coming out in 1992, being published by Konami. However, the copy I have is a 2000 re-release published by Crucial Entertainment, which is literally the exact same game, just on CD with a digitized manual. Which I find curious that anyone would be republishing an old DOS game that late in DOS gaming history. Especially since, for legal reasons, you need more permission than just that of the original developers to release this thing. It's a one-player platformer with support for Tandy 16-color, EGA 16-color, and VGA 16-color graphics, all running at 320x200 resolution. Yeah, the VGA mode is only using 16 colors. I know, it looks like it should be more, but it can be pretty impressive just how much color fidelity you can get out of an image using only 16 colors if you have full control over what those 16 colors are, which isn't something you can do with the Tandy or EGA modes. As for its current release date, it's still commercial, and if you want to just play any version of this at all, then you have an interesting digital option. A remastered version of the game released on Steam around the end of 2018, currently available for $10. Now, I haven't played it myself, but from what I can gather, one of the main selling points is being able to switch between the original Amiga graphics and the remastered 3D graphics at the push of a button. And that the general consensus is that while it does not play exactly like the original Amiga game, it's not that bad either. Not great, just not bad. It's average. Also, players have noticed that the remaster is missing the intro music, and heck, even I refuse to play it in this video because despite being iconic, it's also currently owned by a recording label, and I don't want to make them mad by including a few seconds for fair use purposes. DMCA be damned. Now, if you want a physical copy, well, good luck. Because of how generic the name is, actually finding copies is a trip and a half. And even if you do find one, you have to worry about what system it's for and if the price is fair or not. And the prices I was seeing ranged between $25 and $75, depending on condition and platform. And I couldn't find good stats on what they were typically selling for. So I guess it really comes down to if you want a physical copy or not. Just be aware that it'll be a somewhat difficult and somewhat more expensive process compared to your average retro titles. So there is a story to this game, but it's very basic. You play the role of a quote-unquote classical hero, identified as Hercules depending on the release you're playing, and you've decided to take up the challenge of the gods, wherein if you can find and defeat the 4 guardians of Mount Olympus, you'll be made immortal, becoming a god yourself. Now, the gameplay is actually really basic when it comes down to it. You can move around, jump, climb up and down ladders, and throw your weapons. When you start the game, you actually don't have a weapon, but you quickly get a knife which can be thrown across the screen. Later on, you can acquire up to 3 knives to give yourself a spreading attack, or you can replace the knives with throwing stars which do more damage. Though you have to be careful about upgrading since you lose your knives and go back to 1 shot when switching to throwing stars or vice versa. There's also fireballs and lightning bolts you can acquire to supplement these weapons, with fireballs providing an arcing attack affected by gravity, and lightning bolts being able to pass through walls. Ironically, the 2 pages masquerading as the manual for this DOS port of the game misidentify almost every weapon, calling the knives daggers, the throwing stars shurikens, and the lightning bolts spears, though at least it got the fireballs right. You can also acquire power-ups which change how your attacks spread, either with a wide spreading arc that's good for hitting things above or below you, a normal spreading arc, which is what you start with by default, or an intense, narrow spreading arc that can hit things directly in front of you better. One of the main elements of the gameplay, apart from finding secrets, is solving puzzles, most of which involve switches of some type. Now, the puzzles are designed in such a way that switches can have multiple purposes, and it's never completely clear exactly how the state of the switches are affecting everything. I mean, most of the time, there'll be an instantaneous effect, but sometimes there isn't. Sometimes you need a special item in your inventory for the switch to function, or sometimes other switches have to be in certain states first, or sometimes the effect of a switch isn't produced until you've toggled it more than once. The general rule of thumb here is to throw away everything you think you know about switch puzzles and experiment like crazy. Speaking of the inventory, this is one of those things which confused me at first, as it doesn't behave as you might expect. At the bottom of the screen are 4 slots which you can use to carry items. But at first when I was trying to add items to my inventory, I kept automatically dropping them for some reason, and I couldn't figure it out. So, despite having 4 slots, you can actually only carry 3 items at a time. Now, anytime you put something in your inventory, you have to either move the cursor over something to drop, or to an empty slot. In fact, some of the things you buy from the merchants can't be used directly. You have to drop them into the world first, and then you get to use them by touching them. The reason this gets confusing is because when you pick up an item, it goes into whatever slot is highlighted. So you have to press the fire button again to get it to cycle to the next slot. Otherwise, as soon as you stop crouching, you'll drop whatever it was that you just picked up, and you'll have to wait for it to finish bouncing back into the world before you can attempt to pick it up again. It's awkward at first for sure, but really, it's just a minor thing, and it's easy to adapt to. Generally speaking, items are used to unlock things or trigger events. If you reach a specific trigger with a specific item in your inventory, or use a switch while carrying a specific item, you'll trigger things to happen. Either the opening of a door or a treasure chest, or causing something to appear out of thin air for you to collect. However, there's also a special kind of item known as the teleport gem, which will teleport you elsewhere in the level on contact and only once. They're typically used for shortcuts or to provide access to bonuses for score and money. The bottom corner shows both a score counter and a money counter. And the score does matter in the game, as multiple extra lives are tied to specific score amounts, whereas money is used to buy stuff at the merchants which show up between certain levels. And one thing to note about the merchant interface is that the first time you press the fire button on an item, you only get a description. Press the button a second time without moving the cursor, and you'll attempt to buy the item. But if you can't, or if there's a warning as to why you might not want to, such as replacing knives with throwing stars, you'll have to press the fire button one more time to make the purchase. The last thing to mention before I get into the issues with the game's controls is that, even without the control problems, Gods is intentionally designed to be hard and to require memorization to succeed. And more often than not, you'll end up in situations where you can't simply react. If you don't know what's about to happen, the enemies will swoop in and decimate you. Or you'll try to make a jump thinking you're fine, fall a great distance, and die on impact with the ground, because why does a game with barely any vertical indicators have freaking fall damage? Actually, this is one surprisingly glaring difference between the DOS and Amiga versions, is that the Amiga version does not have that big status bar at the bottom, meaning you have a lot more vertical viewing space, which makes it easier to gauge if you should be making certain jumps or not, seeing as there's no controls to pan the camera up or down. Beyond that, many switches turn out to be traps, causing spikes to jut out of the floor or enemies to spawn in inconvenient places. If the difficulty was just reacting to these things, then maybe, just maybe, I'd have made it further than getting to the first boss. But no, let's talk controls because there's some serious issues here. Firstly, one thing that's common to both the DOS and Amiga versions, which I find odd, is that you cannot jump straight up. only at an angle. Now, you wouldn't think this would be that big a deal. There were a number of times where I could have cleared a situation much more easily if I could just jump straight up and start lobbing knives at my obstacles. Instead, if you want to fire shots in the air, you have to jump forwards to do it. However, at least with the DOS version, there's a delay on the controls, both keyboard and joystick, so it's nothing to do with how you're controlling the game. Basically, it takes a frame or two for the game to register your inputs, and many times there's also an animation preceding an action. Now sure, the animation looks nice, but it means your weapons don't fire immediately, and you don't crouch down immediately either. Your actions have to be very deliberate, and you have to know what you're doing ahead of time because everything is responding too slow to make instant reactions. Furthermore, there's a bit of a glitch going on with the controls that's difficult to explain. Basically, if you release a button and press a different one within the span of a couple frames, the game responds as though both controls were pressed down at the same time, even though only one ever was. This can lead to accidentally jumping when you intended to climb a ladder, or can break your rhythm when firing your weapons, since the way you get additional shots out as fast as possible is to release and press again while your original shot is still in the air. But if you do this too quickly, it won't work right. So yeah, awkward controls, high degree of difficulty despite the control problems, fall damage, squished camera space, secrets hidden freaking everywhere. You'd think after dealing with all of that, I'd just punch in some passwords so I could at least show the later moments of the game, except, well, I can't. Gods does something very unique in some of its releases, which very few games do. It pre-generates its passwords when you first run it. Yeah, any passwords you find online, nope, they don't work. You have to find the passwords for your specific install of the game by playing through it. The devs apparently didn't really want anybody cheating their way to later levels. Not that you'd stand much chance of survival anyways if you couldn't survive the first world. Overall, I get it. I understand why so many people enjoy Gods. It has great graphics and animation, and the gameplay itself, a little bit quirky, is alright. But let's be real here. For those of you who've played this game a lot, imagine for a moment if you didn't know where the secrets or enemies were, not to mention the layout of the levels, and not to mention what even constituted as a potential secret, you'd have a ton of trouble figuring all of that out. And ultimately, that's the boat I was in. I played the first world over and over and over and over again for 5 hours in total, and yet despite that, after concluding that this game was frustrating me to my limits and I opted to watch a playthrough to learn more, I came to realize I only found about 25% of the secrets, and thus kept running out of lives right before or during the first boss. So yeah, if you yourself have never played this game before or are intending to give it a try, you might want to look up an online playthrough first, just to get an idea of how the secrets function and what to watch out for. Beyond that, be prepared for some frustration, because this game is brutal in an unfair way on the DOS side of things. Heck, maybe even just go for the Amiga version or the remastered edition instead. At least if you want to get the game working under DOSBox, you don't have to do any major modifications to the config file. Just set cycles to auto and you're good to go. Anywho, that's all for today's episode of Ancient DOS Games. Next Saturday will be a pro video, and in the spirit of hacking, we're going to see if we can decode the password system for a game that, well, probably no one really cares about anymore. But hey, I think it'll be fun to see if we can hack our way into its later levels without having to play the early levels first. So be sure to stay tuned to see if we can pull it off. Thanks for watching, everyone, and extra special thanks to everyone supporting me on Patreon. Here's just a small selection of you guys.